It was a strategic race in Saudi Arabia as an early safety car triggered by Lance Stroll resulted in a mix of approaches for the drivers. It was a particularly fascinating race as we even saw a rookie driver get an opportunity in a Ferrari as Bearman replaced Sainz. There's a lot to talk about, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive, which today is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. Oliver Bearman makes a great impression on his unexpected debut. Oliver Bearman was given a golden opportunity to prove his capabilities this weekend as he got the call up to replace Carlos Sainz, who had to pull out of the event with appendicitis. The 18-year-old had a huge task this weekend. He had to get up to speed in his new Ferrari car with just a single practice session to prepare. This would be a challenge at any circuit, but the fact that this opportunity has come for Bearman at the Jeddah Corniche circuit, a track that is typically one of the most technical and challenging on the F1 calendar, made it even more difficult. Historically, the race has always seen safety cars or red flags, which means this event, on the whole, was typically difficult for the drivers. Going into qualifying, I thought Bearman would do well to be within 0.5 of a second of Leclerc. The British driver arguably had the toughest qualifying benchmark for a teammate in Formula 1 right now, as the Monegasque driver is typically strong in qualifying events. And so a half-second gap would be impressive for a driver who was in his first ever Grand Prix and who had just 60 minutes of experience in the car before the start of competitive running. In qualifying, Bearman was just over 0.5 of a second behind Leclerc in Q2, and he was under 1/10 of a second from making it into Q3. This was a great achievement and would put him in a position to fight for points on his debut as he would start 11th on Saturday night. This achievement was a great one for the rookie driver. He is fighting in Formula 2 this season to be given an opportunity to get onto the F1 grid full time, but it was certainly a better opportunity to get onto the F1 grid to prove himself in the category itself. Next year he will have an eye on a team like Haas, as he looks like he might be the obvious successor to Hamilton at Ferrari in the long run if he continues to progress on this trajectory. Bearman's race was always going to be difficult. It will have been his longest run in a Formula 1 car, and he would be in the midfield pack, which is typically a dangerous place to be with plenty of close wheel racing. Early on, the Ferrari driver found himself stuck behind Yuki Tsunoda despite being on a softer compound of tyre. This was a difficult start, but as he progressed into the race you could see him learning. He was behind Hülkenberg for a while as the pair were right on top of each other, but he was patient and calculated in making the overtake in the end. As the race progressed, it was Bearman who would find himself in a challenging position where he was the last of the top team runners. The drivers that opted not to pit during the safety car would subsequently find themselves behind the Ferrari driver through the last few laps of the race, and the more experienced British drivers of Norris and Hamilton were behind him. The Ferrari rookie continued to put in excellent laps while running in 7th, as he was very much in his own space on the circuit. He managed to hold off those 2 drivers behind who were on faster tyres and had vastly more experience. This achievement from Bearman to secure 6 points on his debut was nothing short of remarkable. He was getting better and better throughout the Grand Prix and his confidence was growing through the race. I think this race will mean he'll be one of the drivers in the mix for some of those seats that are up for grabs next season, which may well make things even more interesting. For me, Bearman is thoroughly deserving of a green box for his performance today. It looks unlikely that Bearman will be called up for the next race for Ferrari, with Sainz likely to return. But the next 3 races in the 2024 F1 season will see the teams travel to Australia, Japan and China. These team members will certainly have challenges while watching the content that they're used to when they're back at home. But with Surfshark VPN, the sponsor of today's video, this problem will go away. Surfshark is a virtual private network, a tool that I use to change my virtual location to one of their 3,200 servers in 100 countries. This means that I can catch up on the shows that I missed while I'm travelling, including F1 highlights if I can't watch a session live. Surfshark can allow you to adjust your location to access streaming libraries from across the world, for example in France, the USA or even Japan. This can unblock new content that isn't available where you are in the world, and if you have trips planned this year, you could do the same when travelling abroad. But it's not just this. Surfshark secures your personal information whenever you're using public Wi-Fi, meaning you're safe in the knowledge that your data is encrypted and protected when you're on the move. You can get an exclusive Surfshark deal and get an extra 3 months for free by using the code DRIVE at checkout. Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out today and making Surfshark your VPN of choice by heading to the link in the description of this video and supporting the channel in the process. Yet another weekend of Verstappen dominance. If last weekend wasn't enough to convince you that Red Bull are clearly out at the front, the team went to a new level this weekend. While in Bahrain it looked like Red Bull were within reach for the other teams in qualifying, they were dominant this weekend in Saudi Arabia. In qualifying, Verstappen led the way by more than 3/10, and this put him in a great position for the start of the Grand Prix. Early on, Verstappen built out a strong lead, and this is something that we've become very used to as he's driving the strongest car on the grid. He was sensible through the safety car window to get into the pits and get onto the hard compound tyre, and then he was patient to get himself past Lando Norris and retake the lead. This weekend, with Perez finishing second, it felt like Red Bull laid an ominous marker for the teams to chase that was even more dominant than last weekend in Bahrain. It was a shame to see, as we all want to see competitive racing at the front of the F1 order, but for the Red Bull team, this was a brilliant weekend on track with another dominant 1-2 finish for the team. It's been another huge win for the team, and so it's clearly a purple box for Verstappen and Red Bull, who didn't put a foot wrong all weekend. And if you want to see a competitive fight at the front of the order, let me know who you want to see in the mix in the comments, and make sure to subscribe while you're there. McLaren looked closer this weekend. The McLaren car looked more competitive this weekend in Saudi Arabia. The pecking order behind the Red Bull team is still emerging, and it seems like Ferrari is in a secure second position in the pecking order at this point in time. But with McLaren and Mercedes, it seems very close when looking at third in the championship order. Last weekend, Mercedes were on top, and they weren't firing on all cylinders after a cooling mistake from the team, but this weekend it was clearly McLaren that was stronger. The McLaren car has a clear advantage in high-speed corners. The car has a huge amount of downforce, and both drivers were confident on this challenging street circuit. Particularly in Sector 1, the McLaren was disappearing away from the cars behind. However, the McLaren car also has a straight-line speed deficit compared to their rivals. Piastri had a brilliant race today in Jeddah as he raced to 4th in the Grand Prix, after a strong qualifying performance. The Australian driver got himself past Fernando Alonso on track, and despite getting trapped behind Hamilton for the majority of his race, I think he got the maximum out of his car, with Charles Leclerc looking just out of reach in his Ferrari. Lando Norris took a big risk and didn't stop during the early safety car. Going long on the medium tyre, Norris was hoping to have a safety car later or bolt on a set of softs to attack at the end. But his race was hampered by the fact that the Mercedes of Hamilton did the same thing. The two drivers were competing with each other rather than progressing ahead, and this could have been avoided had Norris not have had such a slow pit stop. As a result, Norris could only finish 8th, despite starting in 6th. On the whole, the McLaren team have work to do. They look better in Saudi Arabia than they did in Bahrain, but it seems like they aren't happy with where they are today. They need to progress further when it comes to straight line speed if they want to compete throughout the season, and probably remove some drag. For me, the McLaren team seems to have taken a smaller step forward than Ferrari over the winter, and it will be clearly very close in this pack as teams bring upgrades, but for now, I think it needs to be an amber box for the McLaren team. The Haas isn't terrible. There is always tactical racing on street circuits, and we saw exactly this from Haas this weekend. The team opted to keep Hülkenberg out during the opening stint, which was a tactical move to hold track position. Meanwhile, Kevin Magnussen made the stop, putting himself into the midfield pack. On the whole, compared to where they predicted themselves to be, the Haas team has done a brilliant job this year. Coming into this season, the team predicted themselves to be off the pace, but, as for all backmarker teams, they need to take gambles to secure points. Kevin Magnussen's race, from an independent perspective, was dreadful. The driver left no space for Alex Albon and closed him into the wall, which triggered a 10-second penalty for the Danish driver. And then Magnussen went off track to maintain his advantage ahead of Yuki Tsunoda, which triggered another 10-second penalty. So the driving standards from Magnussen this weekend was poor. However, the driver kept himself ahead of a chasing pack which included Ocon, Albon, Tsunoda and Sargent. All of these drivers were within the pit stop window of Hülkenberg, but his teammate, Magnussen, put in a solid defensive drive to ensure he kept those chasing drivers behind and give his teammate the advantage. So while he didn't drive fair on occasions, he did everything he could for the team. It was duly commended by his race engineer, and this shows what has to be done by these teams to get themselves into scoring positions. Haas ended up securing their first point of the 2024 season with Hülkenberg, and this is a huge achievement for the team as it actually puts them into 6th in the Constructors' Championship, as they are the first team outside of the top 5 to secure a point. This race has built from their early form in Bahrain, as Hülkenberg managed to get into the top 10 in qualifying there. It's been a good start for him and for the team in 2024. And it's a huge achievement for them, so for me, I think they definitely deserve a green box for their performance. Although Magnussen, independently, probably deserves a red box. Alonso proves his worth. Fernando Alonso has secured 10 points for a 5th place finish in Saudi Arabia. The team were in the mix again, and Alonso has shown a huge amount of pace this weekend. The Spanish driver qualified 4th and held on to 5th, losing a position to Piastri, who was in a McLaren car that clearly had stronger race pace. But Alonso did a brilliant job to secure a good haul of points, while his teammate made an error and crashed out of the race. Alonso is a driver who is potentially in demand for 2025 as his contract is finishing at the end of the year. He may well be in a good position for some of the open seats on the grid, and performances like this prove that he's still able to deliver fantastic results despite his age. It's not surprising that Alonso has done well this week given his ability, but he definitely deserves a green box for his performance this weekend as a whole. Honourable mentions. An honourable mention today has to go to Charles Leclerc. He may have been overshadowed by Bearman this weekend, but the Monegasque driver did all he could and secured a comfortable 3rd position. It was a better race in Saudi Arabia with an element of strategy and a brilliant storyline with Oliver Bearman making a tremendous debut, but we'll all be hoping it is closer at the front in Australia. Make sure you subscribe to join me there and head to the top link in the description to get Surfshark VPN today.